In order to protect their daughter, her parents imprisoned her in a machine of less than 10 square meters. And even when they delivered supplies to her every day, they would stay away and not have any contact. Because their daughter has suffered from septicism since she was a child, she can only breathe the filtered air of the purification cabin, and she thought that she would stay in this big coffin for the rest of her life. The terrible thing is that they found through the glass that a yellow airflow suddenly gushed out of the street, and these air currents were discharged from the city's sewer pipes, and all the inhalers fell to the ground. The father, who was on the street, looked confused, but before he could take 2 steps, he saw a larger airflow rushing here. After rushing home, he hurriedly pulled his wife away from the window, and the next second, the poisonous gas instantly blurred the window, and they were still pervasive, seeping directly into the house through the cracks. Fortunately, the daughter was protected by the purification cabin. He hurriedly pulled his wife away quickly, seeing that the poisonous gas was rushing upstairs, and they could only run to the higher floors. They found an old couple living there, who let them in. Mother hurriedly took out the walkie-talkie and asked about her daughter's condition. After learning that there was nothing wrong, they breathed a sigh of relief. Later, they came to the balcony and watched the terrible scene at their feet. They were speechless, but this was not the most terrible thing. Then the man climbed on the roof, looked around, and saw that the whole city was shrouded in poisonous fog, which seemed to be a fairyland on Earth. There was a murderous machine hidden inside, and the poisonous fog caused the whole city to lose power. Although the girl was fine in the purification cabin, but the power of the backup battery could not last tonight. So the man was ready to hold his breath and go downstairs to change the battery for his daughter. He suddenly thought that there was an uncle downstairs who always had oxygen cylinders at home. For the sake of his daughter's safety, he decided to venture down the water pipe. After breaking the window, he successfully entered the uncle's house, and just about to search, he saw a person lying on the ground, and the man stepped forward quickly and found that it was the neighbor's uncle, but he was no longer breathing. The man panicked and hurriedly took out a flashlight to search around, and he couldn't find it after rummaging through the house back and forth. Just when the man was about to suffocate, he finally found an oxygen cylinder in a corner. Immediately afterwards, he did not dare to delay, hurriedly brought the oxygen mask, and then quickly unscrewed the valve, and finally inhaled oxygen at the last moment. After recovering his strength, he filled up an extra oxygen cylinder and was about to leave when he suddenly heard a noise from the bedroom. Driven by curiosity, the man raised his hammer and opened the door, only to find out that it was a puppy. The strange thing is that the puppy is not only fine, but also very excited. Is the animal immune to poison gas? The soon scene negates this inference, because the mother dog in the room is dead. And then he came to the house and successfully replaced his daughter's machine with a spare battery, and also brought some daily necessities. In order to find more spare, he went downstairs again and saw corpses strewn across the silent streets. Seeing them foaming at the mouth and dying miserably, the man unconsciously tightened his oxygen mask. He then got under the car and collected a lot of spare batteries. Just as the man was about to leave, he suddenly heard a whistle. He walked over curiously, only to see a large team passing here. The man came forward to inquire and learned that they were sent by the army to transfer the surviving people. Now that the entire city has fallen, the upper echelons have decided to impose a lockdown after a search and rescue. While talking, the captain saw that the oxygen cylinder brought by the man was simple, and took out a pure oxygen cylinder for him to change, and then beckoned the man to hurry up and keep up with the large army. But the man couldn't leave because his family was still here. The captain was helpless, but he could only turn his head and leave. At this time, the man stopped the captain again, asked for another set of oxygen equipment, and told him about his daughter's condition. Although the equipment was extremely expensive, the captain finally gave him another set. After returning, the man was horrified to find that the height of the poison gas was gradually rising, and if they continued to stay here, they would be poisoned sooner or later, and they had to escape with their daughter, who could only come out by wearing a spacesuit. The spacesuit is far away in the laboratory in the city center. The husband and wife were eager to save their daughter and decided to venture out to find a spacesuit. As the daughter learned that her parents were going to the city center, the daughter begged them to see her friend and bring him with them. He also suffers from sepsis. His parents are away from home all year round. For their daughter's request, they decisively refused because now everyone is in danger and they are not obliged to help other people's children. The husband and wife were helpless, but in the end they agreed to their daughter to stop by and take a look. Strangely, when they arrived at the boy's house, they found that there was no one inside, and they didn't have time to think about it because the oxygen was about to bottom out. So they quickly went to the laboratory and successfully found the spacesuit. The two of them were about to leave with the box. The laboratory exploded. Fortunately, it didn't take long for them to wake up. The man suddenly felt out of breath, and only then did he realize that the oxygen tube was broken. Now there is only one oxygen tank, and the husband and wife can only alternate between using it back and forth, and they have to carry heavy spacesuits. They stopped and stopped all the way, and it didn't take long for them to get to the top. What's worse is that this bottle of oxygen is also about to bottom out, and if it goes on like this, both of them will die here. So the man decided to let his wife go back first, and he would find a way to go home later. The wife was very reluctant because she knew that without the oxygen cylinder, her husband would die. But when she thought of her daughter at home, she held back her tears and left without thinking that this farewell was a last farewell. In order to save oxygen, his wife ran wildly in the streets, but the oxygen still did not last. He rushed home, and when time was short, he quickly took off the oxygen cylinder and then held his breath again, dragging the box with difficulty and crawling to the top floor. Fortunately, it was rushed back after all. but she never thought that the next scene she saw made her suffocate more than in the poison gas. She saw that the spacesuit was burned with a big hole by the explosion. On the other side, the man was still rushing home along the roof. But on a rooftop, he saw a dead man with a fresh bloodstain, who was obviously killed by someone. The man looked at the bloodstains and walked in boldly, and there were traces of human habitation inside. In addition to supplies, there were also oxygen cylinders. He looked again, and after making sure that there was no one nearby, he directly picked up the oxygen cylinder and prepared to go back. Not yet. As soon as he turned, a man in a police uniform walked in and warned him to put the oxygen cylinder down. The man knew that this oxygen cylinder was not his at all. The policeman snatched it with the weapon in his hand and brutally killed someone for this. Seeing that it was pierced, the police also decided not to pretend and slowly touched the gun with his right hand. Unexpectedly, this scene was seen by a man who had been on guard for a long time. He put on an oxygen mask and pushed the policeman into the poisonous fog. Then the two scuffled together. At this time, the pistol accidentally fell to the ground. The policeman wanted to get the gun, but was held by the man from behind. The policeman, without the protection of the oxygen mask, did not last 3 seconds. After he stood up, he quickly rushed home. Here, his wife, who was waiting for him to come home, suddenly found that the battery in her daughter's purification cabin was about to run out, and her husband was not home yet. She ran out of ideas and decided to take the risk to change the battery for her daughter's purification cabin. Looking at the deadly poisonous gas in the corridor, the woman took a deep breath and then did not hesitate to burrow into the poisonous gas. She ran fast, but it can't compare to the pervasive poisonous gas. Seeing that her mother came down without an oxygen mask, her daughter was very anxious, but the mother didn't have time to explain anything, so she quickly replaced the battery. Looking at the lit-up instrument, she was relieved. She began to look deeply at her treasure, daughter. When she finally left, the woman seemed to have a premonition. It took a long time for the man to finally arrive. However, looking at the scene in front of him, he was stunned, slowly approaching in disbelief. But as the distance got closer and closer, the man's heavy oxygen mask was already full of tears, and he couldn't hold back anymore when he looked at his wife, who was lying in the corridor and was no longer breathing. However, the deceased is already gone, and he must act strong. Unexpectedly, before the man could cheer up, his daughter's voice came from the walkie-talkie. The man knew that he couldn't hide it, and understood that this kind of thing had to be said by himself. But when the words came to his mouth, he couldn't open his mouth, because he didn't want to admit that his wife had left. Finally, the man went to the balcony and told his daughter the news of her mother's death. The daughter curled up in the corner silently after hearing this. She did not make a sound, and for the first time she felt that she was a burden. Not long after, a slight earthquake struck the house, and the poisonous gas, which had been only slowly rising, began to rise sharply. It's about to fall completely. The man decided to go out again to try his luck, and see if he could find a few more protective suits for the old couple. But the old man smiled and shook his head, because their lifespan was already short, and they didn't want to waste any more resources belonging to the young people. In the end, he took his demented wife's hand and happily laid in the bed. Here, the man was lucky enough to find a highest-level protective suit for his daughter in a truck. Because he was worried that he would be too slow to rush back, it would cause a big disaster. He found an electric bike on the side of the road and drove back. The visibility in the poisonous gas was extremely low, and the man drove fast, and the next second, a little boy suddenly rushed out. The man couldn't dodge, and his body was thrown away. His head hit the iron bucket, and then he fainted. He didn't know how long it took him to wake up. He limped with the walkie-talkie and called his daughter all the way, but the daughter on the other side had no sound. Thinking that his daughter might have died tragically at home, the man's legs were weak, and he could no longer take half a step forward. He desperately leaned on the car and was ready to wait for death silently, but suddenly found that there seemed to be two figures walking in the white fog. The man stood up in disbelief, and in the next scene, as if in a dream, he saw his daughter running over lively. It turned out that the little friend he was looking for before had already run out of electricity in the purification cabin at home, and he didn't think about it, but he accidentally discovered their symptoms. The man was overjoyed when he heard that he was immune to poison gas, but in the next second he opened his oxygen mask, and then in the puzzlement of his daughter's face, the man kissed his daughter's cheek for the first time. The last funny thing is that when he wakes up again, he finds that he and his daughter have switched identities. This time the person lying in the purification chamber was him, and his daughter was immune to poisonous environment.